My name is Annie Cramer. At 5 seconds, I will open the quotations and give myself 15 seconds. Open. In this hit 2023 series based off of a video game of the same name, The Last of Us became the queer representation that many people did not know they needed. In the third episode, Bill and Frank find each other through a zombie apocalypse, the arguably best way to find a romantic relationship, and had a heartwarming, heart-wrenching love story. They were able to discover and find each other and have this blossoming love throughout this type of isolation. And we can view through the quotation, "You can be in exile in your homeland, in your own house, in a room," by Muhammad Darwish, as accurate. For even though we can find ourselves exiled or in isolation, there can be ways we find and grow. If Bill and Frank can do it, so can we. Hopefully. We can only wish for a love story as good as theirs. We can find that through isolation as a whole, as well as the opposite occurrence of needing humanity, that sometimes being exiled can have good connotations and negative ones. First and foremost, isolation brings a negative connotation in and of the word itself. For some people, however, it works better for them than for others. We can view this through Howard Hughes, as well as the film I Love You, Philip Morris. Howard Hughes, the aviator, ended up going into isolation whenever he was turning older. He wanted to be left alone. However, in came Clifford Irving, who wanted to write an autobiography about him. He decided to do it, and it became incredibly famous. One problem, though, he never actually talked to Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes came forward and said that he never visited him and that this entire autobiography was fiction. He came out of isolation that was bothersome to him in order to defend himself and his own space. He wanted to be left alone, and this other person's interpretation of this bothered him. Moving on to the opposite end of the isolation spectrum, even though for Howard Hughes he preferred it, in the film I Love You, Philip Morris, we can do the opposite occurrence. I Love You, Philip Morris is a true story about someone who escapes prison, commits plenty of fraud, and ultimately has a life in solitary confinement. Based on the true story, the main character in the film, played by Jim Carrey, ends up having his solitary confinement for life based off of the man in real life. He describes solitary confinement as being an indecency to humanity. He has plenty of health problems because of the fact that he is in isolation and the fact that human beings are not made to be cooped up like that. Through I Love You, Philip Morris, as well as Howard Hughes and Clifford Irving, isolation for some can be helpful, but for others, not so much. Even though isolation can be good for people, the fact of the matter is humanity needs one another. You can find that humanity thriving on each other's personalities, that the way we have survived over the years, our companionship. We can find that through the book, I Who Have Never Known Men, as well as an episode of Our Flag Means Death. I Who Have Never Known Men, written by Jacqueline Hartman, whose family escaped Belgium during the Nazi invasion, found that story of isolation. These women are trapped in a bunker for years, not knowing what happened to the outside realm. They manage to escape, and the way they're able to push through this is the perseverance of themselves and the others around them. We need each other in order to thrive and survive, and this book is a personification of that idea. When the main character is left by herself, she realized that she loved the companionship of her sisters almost. There's actually a line in the book that says, human beings need to speak. Otherwise, they lose their humanity. We need each other, and we need to be able to speak to each other, and this is a personification of that idea. Finally, moving on to our final point, our flag means death. This hit series came about in 2022, with its second season released in 2023. When Blackbeard goes a bit awry after being heartbroken by Steed, he ends up completely destroying most of the ship as well as almost killing his crew. After he recovers from almost being killed by his crew, he makes an apology that is very reminiscent of influences of this day and age. He tries to apologize, saying that this is a safe spaceship, for he wants to remain on the ship, mostly for the sake of his love Steed, but also just to find that companionship in general. Throughout the rest of the season, so far, he attempts to do his best at recuperating and trying to find this community with his crew yet again. Through our findings death, as well as I Have Never Known Men, we can find that humanity needs each other. We thrive one another. Through humanity thriving with one another, as well as the idea that isolation can be negative and positive, the quotation, you can be in exile in your homeland, in your own house, in a room by Muhammad Darwish is correct. For whether we like it or not, we can be exiled, but fact of the matter is, we do better whenever we are surrounded by others. That is how we persevere and thrive as human beings. Without one another, we wouldn't really know how to function. So even though in The Last of Us, Bill and Frank were able to survive just fine on their own, well, at least Frank of all people, they managed to thrive better with each other. And even though the episode ends absolutely heart-wrenching, they found that companionship with one another, even through this type of exile. And as previously stated, we can only hope to find a relationship as good as theirs.